And the purpose of this video is to explain the purpose of the channel and the philosophy that underpins it. When I do or say stuff, I'm making basic assumptions about the world, and I think it's important that you know those assumptions that I'm making, so you know where I'm coming from in the future. So like many, I struggled with existential questions as a child. I wondered where are we? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? And these questions kind of ate at me for quite a while, years and years. So I read a lot. I read, philosophy. I read about religion. I read physics and stuff. And over years, literally years of time, I was able to come up with a basic set of assumptions and a basic understanding of the world. So my views of the world, they center upon two people, two teachers. I consider myself a disciple of Jesus and a disciple of Heraclitus, with Jesus embodying the views of my views of ethics, and Heraclitus embodying my views of cosmology. So what Jesus did is he developed the New Covenant, and in order to understand the New Covenant, which is in the New Testament, you have to understand the Old Covenant in the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, God, or being, makes a covenant, the Old Covenant, with Abraham. And the deal was that God would protect Abraham and his descendants if they followed God's laws, of course. So 10 Commandments. There's actually more. There's actually, I don't remember the exact number, but there's a lot. But the problem with all these commandments and all these laws that, they had to follow was that, a lot of people couldn't follow them properly. So they kind of got left out. And Jesus changed this by introducing the New Covenant, which is written about in the New Testament. If you're curious and you're new to this, I'd recommend reading the Gospel of Luke. That's it. So what changed was instead of it being focused on the laws and stuff and people who were failing, being totally left out, Jesus went to the people who were struggling, and he welcomed everyone with the New Covenant, welcoming even those who were routinely left out. So everyone was to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of age, class, sex, etc. And I think Jesus' example of how he treated others, it's a pretty good example of ethics, and that's why he's considered the Son of God, and that's why I follow him, because I think he treated people quite well. So that's the first assumption I'm making. I'm taking his view of ethics. In terms of my view of cosmology, I took the viewpoint of Heraclitus, and Heraclitus described the universe as eternal fire. Now this is a metaphor for change, and the universe he described it as pure change, and I think that's quite obvious. If you look around you, the universe is always changing. Time is moving, particles are interacting, things are going from one place to another. I think change is obvious in the universe, and that's a good way to describe it. However, that being said, that kind of has its problems, because if things are always changing, there's nothing to really, there's no way to understand it. You can't, things are always changing, it's confusing. So for that reason, Heraclitus put something in the center of the changing universe at the most fundamental level, something that's constant and permanent that you can hold on to even among the changing stuff. And he called this permanent thing Logos. I would almost consider it God, not referring to some sky fairy, but the bedrock of the universe that's holding it together. If you want a definition of that, it would be God is the most metaphysically fundamental reality of which all else is derived. So there we go. So when looking at the world, I'm making those two assumptions, from Jesus and Heraclitus. Jesus on how to treat others, and then Heraclitus on the world being change and stuff, with there being a bedrock to it, so you can understand everything. So that's how I understand the world and my place in it. Now, once I had this basic understanding of what the world was, the next question I had was, what should I do? What should I actually do in the world? And the breakthrough came in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. See, if you read it, I would recommend you read it, or at least read the summary, like Wikipedia. The actual version, it's free online, so would recommend reading it. But it's incredibly important because Aristotle defined the meaning of life. Now, he said the meaning of life is eudaimonia, and that directly translates to having a good demon inside you. But it pretty much just means happiness. So the meaning of life is happiness, of course. So everyone ought to live a life that makes them happy, where they can look back on everything that they did and have this feeling of satisfaction that everything they've done was worth it. So the question after that was, okay, we have our basic understanding of the world. We know what we should be striving for. We should be striving for happiness. So how does one achieve happiness? That was the new question. And if you look at like the history of the world and stuff, and like the history of religion, you can see all these different religions, cults, philosophy clubs or whatever. They all popped up to answer this question. So how do we get that happiness? And like Buddhism, they thought happiness is ceasing desire. That's what the Buddha said, getting rid of desire. Some thought happiness was, through unity with nature, becoming one with nature. Some thought it was through peace, like the Jains and stuff. Some thought it was through submission to an all-powerful God. And when developing my views, I eventually took the viewpoint of the Gnostic Christians. Christians, follower of like Jesus and stuff, follower of Christ. And the Gnostics were actually a heretical sect of Christianity, which is kind of funny, in the first century, shortly after Jesus' death. And the Gnostics, they didn't call themselves Gnostics. In fact, it was a catch-all term that the Catholic bishop Irenaeus coined when talking about all these different groups. He wrote a book called Against Heresies, and he used Gnostics as the catch-all term for a bunch of sects he didn't agree with. So if you look at that, you'll see the Valentinian Gnostics had different beliefs than the Manichaean Gnostics, and the Manichaeans had different beliefs than the Hermetics, and so on. It was a cluster. But what the Gnostics did have was a desire for knowledge, and they thought that this knowledge, or knowledge in Greek, it's gnosis, like personal knowledge of the divine. That's what it means. So they thought knowledge, looking for information and stuff, was the path to happiness. And I agreed with this wholeheartedly. For me, happiness, I saw it as developing a complete understanding of the world. I was very curious. Einstein has this really cool quote that reads, "I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon, in this spectrum or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details." So Einstein was very curious. He was also an atheist. He was just saying that, to just say, like, I want to understand the world. But that's the purpose of this channel. It'll pretty much just be a science channel where I just talk about, like science stuff. You can expect videos on math, physics, programming, and like more. And finally, this is like my personal belief system. I don't care like what you believe in, as long as it makes you happy. Again, the meaning of life is happiness, and this is what makes me happy. So I actually grew up Catholic, attending Catholic school and going to church, and I didn't get much out of church or religion class in terms of that. So I made most of my progress trying to figure things out by myself. I'm also introverted, and I don't like going to social events, church gatherings and stuff. So I kind of looked at like being spiritual but not religious, but that felt kind of shallow, just like reading all these philosophical texts. So I wanted like specific concrete things I could like look at and like do and stuff. not just some broad understanding of the universe. And that's why I consider myself a Gnostic. If you'd like to understand the universe at its most fundamental level, that's great. That's awesome. So check out the channel. Also, do things on your own terms. My path to happiness will be different than yours, and that's okay. As long as you're happy, I'm happy. And best of luck on your journey.